past on this channel, I've made a few videos about certain games which are considered to be of questionable quality. To put it very politely, games like Big Rigs Over the Road Racing and Action 52 are widely considered to be among the worst of all time. And because I literally have nothing else to do at the moment, I started to wonder what other games are there that could possibly be as bad as any of those. And I had a look online and it turns out that, disturbingly, there's quite a few. I found an article on the Top 10s website which detailed the 10 worst games ever made, and the list was as follows. Number 10, Ride to Hell Retribution. Sounds a bit aggressive. Number 9, Sonic the Hedgehog, the 2006 version. Number 8, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. Interesting title. Number 7, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Number 6, Custer's Revenge. Never heard of that one. Number 5, Action 52. Deserved. Number 4, Bubsy 3D. Number 3, Big Rigs Over the Road Racing. Again, deserved. Number 2, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And number 1, according to them, was the Nintendo 64 Superman game. So, quite an interesting list there. Some games there are rather obscure, which sound a bit bizarre to me. And then there are some other ones which are presumably just really bad adaptations of well-known franchises. So, it doesn't matter what the source material is, it just goes to show that any game, if in the wrong hands, can be pretty dreadful. Now, as I said earlier, Action 52 and Big Rigs Over the Road Racing have already featured on this channel, so instead I'll be playing the games at number 11 and number 12, which were Zelda the Wand of Gamelon and Shaq Fu respectively. Now, a quick disclaimer before we get into this. My original plan for this video was to use various emulators on the internet to actually play these games. However, emulators for some of them don't seem to exist online at the moment, so what I'm going to do instead is put in some pre-existing footage of those games and then talk over them as if I am actually playing them, which to me isn't ideal, but I think it keeps the video more interesting, and I'll put watermarks over the video of the channels where the footage comes from, so you can go and have a look for yourself if you want to. Now, it's no secret that sometimes companies like to involve a particular celebrity with their products, whether that's through advertising or with video games, sometimes even featuring them as an actual playable character. But in the case of Shaq Fu, they went for the latter. Shaq Fu is a fighting game featuring Shaquille O'Neal, someone who is well renowned for his fighting ability and definitely not for a completely different sport which has nothing to do with this. However, the actual story is just as, if not more, ridiculous. It starts off in Tokyo, where Shaq walks into some shop. He is told by the owner about some child called Nezu, who he has to protect. He then enters the second world, which one can only assume refers to a country that is neither a first world nor a third world country. While in the second world, he fights many supernatural beings. That's pretty much how the story goes up until this point. Now we're in the game itself, and at first glance it just looks like any other early 90s fighting game, apart from the fact that you play as a basketballer. But, and I know that I'm not the best gamer in the world, however, the controls for this are completely broken. You can only move by slowly tiptoeing across the screen. Also, half the time you press a button to, throw a punch or a kick or something, Shaq doesn't actually do anything. So you spend half of the time trying to distance yourself from your opponent while you figure out how to get used to this messed up control scheme. Yeah, it's not hard for me at least to see why this game was on the list. This one actually has somewhat of an interesting backstory. Well, interesting to me anyway. So back in the early 1990s, Nintendo was working with Sony on a CD-based game console. It was never made, but Sony decided to revisit the idea on their own shortly afterwards, and thus the PlayStation was born. However, while all of that happened, Nintendo was also working with Philips on a similar idea, and the Philips CDI was created, a system which was widely panned upon release for its poor quality games and high price. But despite the poor reception, Philips actually had the license to use some of the characters from Nintendo's games in their own, and such classic games like Hotel Mario and Zelda the Wand of Gamelon were created. However, despite all of that, as far as I'm aware, this game is best remembered for its terrible quality cutscenes, which look and sound as if they were made by some 5-year-old with Microsoft Paint and Windows Movie Maker.
Let's see. That ought to do it. Works pretty good.
This is what the actual game looks like, and it seems to be the same as any other game in this franchise, not that I know much about it. There are some issues, however. The cutscenes, which make my eyes bleed every time I look at them, show up far too often. Also, the game gets quite confusing with all the different ways you have to navigate. I don't even know if this thing is working properly. So from a couple of older games we move on to a more recent one. Ride to Hell Retribution is some sort of action-adventure game that involves beating the crap out of people for no reason whatsoever and riding motorbikes. That's pretty much it really. Apparently this was originally supposed to be an open world game, but due to budget cuts that was dropped in favour of a linear narrative, which probably wasn't the best idea. Just like the Zelda game I previously spoke about, this has cutscenes which are not exactly pieces of art.
I done watched y'all bleed. How pretty like.
Bleeding isn't the same as dying, and I'll teach you the difference if you don't tell me where to find the other guys who were there that night.
Another issue is the main protagonist. The story is about this Vietnam War veteran named Jake Conway. He comes home only to find out that his loved ones have been attacked by a group of bikers or something. However, despite his very real desire for revenge, this game seems to be more focused on making you engage in these very awkward sex scenes, which would probably get my channel taken down if I were to show them. This guy you play as also seems to think that it's perfectly acceptable to kill people just because he doesn't like them. So here we have a game that is part of a particularly well-known and beloved franchise, but in the case of this 2006 instalment, where did everything go wrong? There seem to be quite a few glitches present, which I guess makes this the big rigs of Sonic games. However, the biggest problem with this game is the amount of time it takes to load everything. If you go into a menu, it loads. Selecting an option, it loads. In fact, many functions in this game display a loading screen. I'm going to show you one of these loading screens in real time to give you a proper understanding of how disruptive they are. Imagine having that happen literally every 30 seconds. Anyway, it's going to take a while to do anything else in this game, so let's move on. Here's another example of how sometimes the barriers to entering the video game market are just too high. The 3DO was a brand name given to several systems, all developed by the 3DO company at first. However, many of them were actually manufactured by more renowned companies like Panasonic and Samsung. Despite the strong backing and promotion, the 3DO was a disaster upon release, mainly because of the strong competition from other brands like Nintendo and Sega and poor quality games. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties being one of those games. Well, actually, the term game can be very loosely applied here, as it's more of an interactive film, a very bad one at that. One problem is that the game was advertised as full motion video. However, it is composed entirely of still images, which is not video at all when you think about it. The story plays out as some kind of romantic comedy, which is neither romantic nor funny, to be honest. Personally, I'm not a big fan of interactive films anyway. I just think that it should either stay a film, or if it is going to involve interactivity, then make it a game. However, with this, there are some very obvious issues with quality. The title screen and opening credits have bizarre filters all over the place, and, just like the Zelda cutscenes, look like the work of a 5-year-old with Windows Movie Maker. I mean, just look at that font. My guess is that the only reason they didn't use Comic Sans is because it probably hadn't been invented yet. Also, this has some of the best voice acting and sharpest audio the world has ever seen.
So, who do you want to make the first move? If you want John to do it, hit A now.
Hi, my name's John. I'd like to make you, meet you.
At least he speaks his mind. Hi, I'm Jane. God, he's cute. Great smile.
Throughout the narrative, this weirdo in a berry appears to just give pointless exposition.
Hey, sport. Harry again. John made the first move just like you wanted him to, but now she's slipping from his grasp. We know she'd like to meet him. She knows she'd like to meet him. But does John know she'd like to meet him? What's a guy to do? It's up to you, sport.
Now, if you were, for some reason, hoping that this guy would show up again with a chicken mask, then there you are. Wait a second, I think I recognise that drum beat from somewhere. Anyway, I think that's enough awkward romance for one video. Here we have a simple game based on one of the most widely known stories there is, so what could be so bad about it? Well, at first glance, not all that much. It doesn't seem like there's much that can go wrong, as this is an old NES game from 1988. Well, as I launched the game, all became clear. You'd expect a game like this to show some kind of introduction detailing what you're supposed to be doing, but nope. Instead, you begin immediately with no indication of what your objectives are. Here I'm playing as Dr. Jekyll. Normally you'd be able to jump in a video game, but not here. Another thing you can't do is use weapons, or defend yourself in any way, which is quite irritating when literally everything you come across is trying to kill you. Once Dr. Jekyll is killed, which let's be honest is going to happen very quickly in this game, you play as Mr. Hyde, his evil alter ego. Once this happens, you can actually jump and defend yourself, which is quite a novelty really. But this game simply will not allow you to win, as once you get past a certain point, the game automatically kills you, for no reason at all really. Right, I think that's probably all I can say about this one. This is possibly the most outrageous game, or thing for that matter, that will ever feature on this channel. Custer's Revenge was released for the Atari 2600 in 1982, and the cover art makes it clear that it's an adult video game cartridge. Okay. But what is so controversial about this game, you might ask? Well, the game involves you playing as a naked man with a rather big penis in the middle of the desert. Your objective is to engage in sexual activity with a Native American woman, who's also naked, while avoiding the arrows flying towards you from the top of the screen. If you do get hit with an arrow, then your character jumps up and down for a bit and you have to start again. I think that a game like this coming out nowadays would definitely still have some level of controversy. I mean, look at what GTA allows you to do. But back in the early 1980s, when video games were very primitive and it was just Space Invaders, Pac-Man or Mario, and maybe a few others, then I can imagine hardly anyone saw something like this coming, and its place on the top 10 worst games ever is definitely deserved. Bubsy 3D is another game that is part of a franchise, although probably not one you've ever heard of. The Bubsy franchise started off with the first two games being released on some of the more popular systems of the time, like the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. Then there was the third game released on the Atari Jaguar, which is another fairly poorly received game console. None of these games were particularly popular or successful, but when this fourth game was released for the PlayStation in 1996, this proved to be the final nail in the coffin. One thing I really don't like is the camera. I have to press the left and right buttons to slowly get the camera to move left and right around this character, rather than it just moving automatically like it should. The controls are also rubbish. For example, when I'm running and I let go of the button, he'll keep running for at least another couple of seconds. I can't even work out what I'm really supposed to be doing. I think the objective is to just run around collecting points from these planet-shaped things while avoiding these little fellows who try to make you feel dizzy for a bit. This isn't exactly a gameplay premise which is going to hold your attention for very long, and don't get me started on the voice acting.
Hey, once I grab this power-up...
Bobsy Smash Puny Wallies.
2 points! You're not so tough! Woo 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 woo! Sting like a bee! Smokin'!
Right, moving on. This on paper seems like the perfect idea. Back in Christmas 1982, this game, based on one of the most beloved films ever made, was about to be released. Many copies were made and sales were expected to be strong, so where did it all go wrong? Well, the gameplay itself is not very exciting, even for something over 40 years old. All you do is play as E.T., running around collecting whatever these are, while trying to escape these guys who seem to pop up on screen at random. A lot of the time I end up in these pits, and the only way to get out is to have E.T. float to the surface by stretching his neck. It's very tedious and goes on way too long. I don't know what these numbers at the bottom of the screen mean, but they seem to decrease whenever I move, so that can't be good. When it was released, the game actually almost killed off the entire industry because of its terrible quality. And if even that wasn't enough, Atari actually made more copies of the game than there were systems to play it on, and when the game was a complete disaster upon release and nobody bought it, the stores selling it actually ended up returning them directly to Atari. And what did Atari do? Well, they secretly buried over 700,000 game cartridges, some of which being this ET game, in a New Mexico landfill site using 14 dump trucks. This wasn't actually discovered until 2014, and before then it was just an urban legend. However, after it was discovered, it was revealed that it wasn't just the ET game that was buried. There were also other cartridges like old Pac-Man ones that were never sold that were also buried, and well, just goes to show that the game industry by this point was starting to fail, and it wouldn't be until the NES was launched that things started to improve. So this is the game that, according to that original article, was the worst of all time, but is it really deserving of that title? Well, the first issue is how repetitive it all is. Much of the game consists of flying through these rings on the screen, although occasionally you get to actually, fight villains. This game also seems to have quite a lot of glitches in it, where things will often end up in the wrong place, such as what you're seeing on screen now. Right, I think I've tolerated enough shitty games for one day. So we have now come to the end of this journey through some of the most reviled games in existence, and to be honest, I'm not surprised. I mean, a lot of these games, it's fairly easy to see why they are held in such poor regard, and a lot of the time it's always the same problems that keep affecting these games, whether that's just bad cutscenes, constant glitches, or simply repetitive gameplay, poor graphics, voice acting especially. A lot of the same issues can ruin a game, and I think that this video has demonstrated that. And any game is technically vulnerable. It's not just the sort of small obscure games that nobody's ever heard of. It is sometimes installments in big popular franchises like that Sonic game or the Superman one. But that is where I'm going to leave this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.